What I'd really like to focus on is some issues associated with the current environment in the United States right now. I will mention and offer you some perspectives with regard to the international licensing arenas. They are not as far along and they are not as mature as what has taken place in the United States in the last couple of years to improve and potentially provide the foundation for more innovative designs to get through the licensing process. I keep wanting to use this, but it doesn't work. And neither does this. Let me try this. There we go. Just a few more. So we're going to look down the road, and I call it around the, over the horizon, although you don't see around the corner. I'm going to talk about the U.S. new nuclear progress. I'm going to talk about advanced reactor licensing initiatives. I'm going to talk about the environment in Washington right now with regard to regulatory policies, processes, and budgets. And I'll just share with you some insights associated with legislation that for the first time has made its way through bipartisan votes in the oversight committees of the NRC. Because of the stasis in Congress right now, given the election, whether one of these legislative initiatives will see the light of day after Congress reconvenes at some time or next year, it's not clear. But those of us who've been involved in this business for as many years as I have, this is one of the most positive indications of a willingness, bipartisan willingness on the part of Congress to do things different to the advantage of the advanced reactor community. Obviously, a big portion of the enthusiasm on the Hill relative to this is associated with the fact of the awareness that's increasing of the contribution that nuclear can make to clean air and to climate change. And real quickly, I'll just summarize. In spite of the moribund statements associated with new nuclear in the United States, it is still moving forward. Watts Bar, while it got its construction permit almost 30 years ago, there was a value associated with it relative to load conditions in the Tennessee Valley that allowed TVA to decide to finish it and get it licensed. So they are operating, and I think they went online not too many weeks ago and are actually generating power. You've heard about and know about the 2 units down at Vogel, the AP 1000 units owned by Georgia Power and a consortium. They're moving along. They are the first test case for the Part 52 process that you just heard about. They are in the throes of battling the challenge associated with having to build something consistent with what the promises were that were made and agreed to by the NRC. The industry I can characterize, and by the way, I can speak very freely now that I don't work at the NRC anymore and can make some judgments that I think are based on 38 years of experience. The industry begged for a rule that would give them finality associated with their design once it was approved by the NRC. And it's be careful what you wish for. They brought to the NRC a level of design detail because they were building plants in China, and this is the case of Westinghouse, such that when you had a design commitment that needed to be provided or a response to a request for additional information, and you had a completed construction drawing that represented the commitment, you put it in the application. Well, the NRC turned around based on their process and approved that design certification and then confirmed it by a rule in a Federal Register notice. What do you think that meant when they went to build it and decided it wouldn't fit, or that they couldn't build what they had promised? They had to get an exemption from a Federal Register rule from the NRC, and I'm talking about dimensional tolerances, sometime to the tune of a ½ inch. So, you know, it's one of those situations where be careful what you wish for. Finality was one of these sought-after holy grails that the industry wanted. They got it, and now they're trying to suffer they're having to suffer the consequences associated with having gotten it as they try to build the design that they got the finality on from the agency. So, you know, there are no more single-edged swords in this world. Summer is in the same mode as Vogel. 2 units in South Carolina. Some of the, we talk about the business side of this, the receptiveness and the ability to undertake these huge construction projects, which are moving into the $15 to $20 billion range for each of these, is fact that they are both taking place in what are still, quote, regulated markets in South Carolina and Georgia. And that's not true if you've been hearing the stories about the predicted and soon to happen shutdown of several large nuclear power plants in other parts of the United States. Those shutdowns are occurring in what are traditionally unregulated environments. So therefore, there's not a value provided associated with the baseload generation nor the carbon-free generation. It's not valued by the free market that exists in those states. The NRC is still issuing combined licenses. Fermi was issued in May. South Texas was issued in February of 2016. And they just finished the uncontested or mandatory hearing for the Levy County plant for 2 units in Levy County, Florida. It was presented by Duke. And just yesterday, the NRC issued the final safety evaluation report for the Williams States Lee Station in South Carolina. So, again, by Duke. There's a early site permit that has been issued to, I've drawn a blank on PSE&G in New Jersey, and that early site permit has a structure to it that would allow it to be used to support an application for small modular reactors at that site. And so, in effect, that's a step forward in the small modular reactor world. This is a summary slide of what was still under review, but as I just mentioned, the Lee Station, the FSER is finished, the environmental impact statement's finished, and the mandatory hearings, mandatory hearing is yet to be scheduled. Levy County, I expect to be issued in the next few weeks. And design certifications of those specific large light water designs are still under review. Expected is Clinch River site early site permit from TVA, and I say, oops, it just arrived. So it's on the NRC's doorstep going acceptance review. That early site permit, again, is one that embraces what's called a plant parameter envelope approach that would permit a variety of small modular reactor designs to be placed on that site. NuScale you've heard about, standard design certification expected in the fall, and UAMPS is the Utah Associated Municipal Power System combined license application, who has reflected a desire to incorporate the NuScale standard design into their application. This is a fascinating process given that UAMPS is a state agency in Utah, and they're a power generation and transmission aggregator. They refer to themselves as a utility, but it's hard to characterize them as a utility. They have 38 to 43, given their status, member co-ops, hydro stations, small towns, small municipalities, small coal plants, large coal plants, and then an enormous transmission system connecting them all in the Rocky Mountain West. And they have decided that, given that they've got load that will be increasing, they'd like to have another alternative generation source to feed into their system, and they're trying to get their 38 members to agree to fund that. And that small modular reactor has got to be delivered by the NuScale and Fluor at a price, in effect, that would allow them to make the decision that this is what they ought to go with. If that price point or sweet spot on price is not reached, UAMPS will build combined cycle gas, and they've made that statement publicly. So there's a great obligation on the part of Fluor, who owns a big part of NuScale, and NuScale, to offer them the price that they need in order to go forward with their project. And if I were giving advice, I'd suggest Fluor ought to offer them whatever price they need to have, given that they're the only customer that NuScale has been able to identify or generate at this point in time. Some initiatives. This is a representative slide of what I would call everybody and anybody who has an interest in the future of an expanded use of nuclear in the United States to the benefit of many issues: load growth, clean air, and reduction of carbon footprints. You might recognize some of these. They're either industry organizations, standard developing organizations, or what's called NGOs, non-governmental organizations. The one who has, of course, sponsored this boot camp is the Clean Air Task Force and the Nuclear Innovation Alliance, but they have been closely affiliated with all of these activities. There's a great deal of enthusiasm out there with regard to improving the likelihood or enhancing the likelihood of getting through the licensing and commercialization of innovative designs. International initiatives, they're out there. They're more focused at this point in time on harmonizing the regulatory requirements for large light water reactors. There's very little movement in terms of efforts to attempt to harmonize the activities associated with either small light water modular reactors or advanced reactors. In terms of the harmonization that I think you asked about, Mark, so far has been this multinational design evaluation program, which is under the auspices of the Nuclear Energy Agency, which is part of OECD in Paris. The MDEP has generated an enormous amount of cross-country sharing of information to the safety benefit of several countries. There's an enormous design change going through the process at the NRC affecting Vogel and Summer and Lee and Levy that was identified by the generic design approval process in the UK, having to do with what's called the condensate return system for a passive plant. And that was overlooked by the NRC. We did not examine the calculations that had supported the return rate of some of the coolant during the passive cooling phase. Had the GDA process not identified it, we might have overlooked it, and it would not have had an immediate safety concern, but the plant, under certain circumstances, would not have been able to meet its design basis relative to the time frame that they could be able to go without any offsite power. Mark?
Questions? Okay.
Sure. I mean, if I can keep moving fast.
So would you say then that there's a space and opportunity in the market for someone in the US to interact with someone who's looking at the more advanced reactor designs? So, for example, to the design evaluation program, if the others, the OECD, are looking at light waters.
OECD, I think at this point in time, there is consideration being given to, they call these working groups under MDEP, and there's one focused on each principal large light water design. I believe they're in the formative stages of creating a small modular reactor working group. Okay, but you're going to run into, as the earlier speaker said, transnational acceptance of sovereign safety determinations is probably a chimera.
Somebody in line with the OECD at the moment, so.
Yeah, and one of my favorite colleagues for many years is now the director of safety at OECD. And they're just now sticking their toe, if I can put it that way, into the idea of coming up with some international forum that would facilitate the acceptance of findings from one regulatory agency to the other. And that's maybe why I characterize it that way. Okay, there are a lot of people putting their toe in this water, but nobody's immersed very far. And I would suggest, with regard to the improved or enhanced regulatory review process for innovative non-light water designs, including, I guess, small modular, I would guess that the United States is probably deeper in the water than anybody else right now. And that has to do with kind of the enthusiasm and excitement associated with some of the innovative small modular reactor, advanced reactor startup companies. It's going to be a rough road. I don't think it's going to be as rough as some of what I call I got to be careful referring to age, some of the old industry naysayers relative to their views and grudges associated with their prior experiences with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. But it's still gonna be a rough road because we're moving into now a state of technology readiness on the part of the regulator that just hasn't been needed and isn't there at this point in time. You've probably heard about this report, given the involvement of all of you with regard to this boot camp. This report was very well received throughout the nuclear community and over on Capitol Hill. It formed the basis for the initiatives that were embraced in those legislative initiatives I told you about. It also has formed the basis for a large step forward made by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in starting a public interaction process to talk about a different licensing process.
Just a quick one, I promise. Do you think that age and the kind of, so people have been, we had this conversation back in the UK, that people have been kind of poisoned by the idea of nuclear power because they got thwarted beforehand. Do you think people still remember that? Do you think it's human nature for people working at the NRC to kind of have a certain way of thinking, and maybe the new generation coming in will change that?
I said that I'll just give you a little history. I was the director of new reactor licensing for the 10 years before I retired in 2014. Because of some of those attitudes, age-related, I'll call it stodginess, one of the concepts that I was a participant in developing is we needed to bring together an independent, if I could say that, independent review activity separate from what was the Office of Nuclear Reactor Regulation. There are many motivations for doing it, but one of my motivations encouraging it is I hired 500 new people. And I'm going to suggest it had a very positive effect in moving the agency in such a way that we were enabling the success of these new entities as opposed to being viewed as our job was to impede them in interest of safety.
Yeah.
My view was we needed to enable people to make a safety case that we could designate as being successful. So I think there is that issue. I shared with somebody here just a few minutes ago that you also find in the organizations that I just threw a few logos up that represent, particularly the more standard setting organizations in NEI, they are finding themselves with divided loyalties because of some age-related issues. You've got people who are very well-heeled supporting an industry standard setting organization or an industry representational organization that still holds some views that if you can just get the Congress to tell the NRC to do it faster and cheaper, we'd all be better off. And then you get a contingent, which I'd like to think I represent, given that I have some clients that are in the new and innovative role, who say, wait a minute, a solid safety case and approval by the regulator is the best thing that could happen to us in terms of marketing and design. And we're more concerned about the periodic reduction in regulatory risk, not safety risk, regulatory risk, by getting periodic feedback. We're much happier to get that on a periodic basis so we can offer those positive reactions to our venture capitalists, okay, than we are worried about the overall cost or schedule. Progress is more important, whereas you take a traditional utility, they're always looking at the bottom line associated with how much it's going to cost and how fast can you do it. A little bit of an editorial view there. You've maybe seen these goals, and I've just supported with that background of the discussion, why a staged licensing process is viewed to be a very positive issue associated with particularly advanced non-light water reactor people. These are the policy recommendations that were made. I'm going to suggest to you there's been a very positive reaction to it. In terms of the NRC, they're guided by policies represented by these factors. I want to suggest that this is my statement, and I have yet, given that I used to be the Director of Emergency Preparedness and was appointed to that job after 3 Mile Island, that future deployment of any advanced reactor design in the United States will probably hinge on the policy decisions related to the size of the plume exposure pathway. And it'll be regardless of the acceptability of the overall safety design. This issue has a basis in science and a basis in technology, but is ultimately a political issue. there are going to be issues surrounding, I don't care how safe or what how small the likelihood is of an accident that would result in radionuclides beyond a site boundary. There will still be a political and policy decision to be made either within the NRC or on Capitol Hill that will determine whether or not such a proposal will be accepted and embraced in law and in regulation. And it has to do with people's uncertainties. Along those lines, though, the commission recognized, yep, that's a big one, so we're going to told the staff to go to rulemaking and start down that road so we can end up with a rule that will facilitate and hopefully be accepted and supportive of the variety of technologies that may be proposed and potentially deployed. The processes, your prior speaker spoke of them. I'm going to just indicate that the recently appointed chairman basically is of the view that our framework of regulations and the processes that are in place are sufficient to license any technology that comes forward. But he's also of the view we're not necessarily technologically ready to do that. Where the regulatory framework might be in place, the technology-wise people who would have to review some of these details probably aren't in place yet or aren't trained. So they did ask for the first time off fee-based funding in order to get ready for one of these applications. And that was favorably received by the Appropriations Committee, but because of some of those crazy riders over on the Hill, that never went forward. As he said, we're ready to go, but licensing infrastructure and technical preparation is yet to come. And I'll just suggest to you real quickly, these are the kind of things that were embraced by the Senate and the House in terms of supporting just the kind of innovative advanced reactor design concepts and licensing improvements. And that was the Appropriations Committee report. They supported the NRC's request. But again, that appropriation bill failed for other reasons.